6 o'clock. Hello,
Welcome.
everyone.
Are you going to do it, Marylin? Look at you.
Well,
You know what, Marylin? I think you're turning. I think we got to get you on PBS or Channel 7.
well,
I
so,
think
so
it's time.
no. I think I like being with you guys, and I enjoy being with you a whole lot. So I'm fine where I'm at. But thank you for the sentiment. I'm just so happy that we're able to do this, and I hope, Lord willing, that we continue to do it for many, 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 many years to come. Hello, everyone. This is Marylin Pierre, and I am a co-host of You Be the Judge, and we have one of our other co-hosts with us, Dr. Dyer. Our third co-host, Judge Claudia Barber. She hasn't joined us yet, but she will hopefully soon. We are just so happy to have you here. We're happy to have you join us, and we really, really hope that you enjoy the conversation that we're going to have today, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about with one of my favorite people to talk about it. And, chime in with your questions anytime that you have one, because it is going to be that sort of conversation. Dr. Dyer, would you like to say anything before we get started?
Absolutely, and we love to say thank you to the guests that we've had, and the guests that we have, and to always encourage anyone, if they have any ideas of guests that would like to hear on You Be the Judge, please inbox us through any way you can, social media, because we get out there on all our podcast channels. We're on iHeart, iTunes, YouTube, and things like that. So this is this is a labor of love, and I don't say that lightly, because we are consistently here every Wednesday from 6 to 7 on You Be the Judge. And my two lovely co-hosts, you hear that, Marylin? Two
Yes,
lovely
yoo-hoo,
co-hosts.
I have been upgraded. I can die happy now.
We're about giving the information, having an understanding, and hopefully it puts you into an action. I say that repeatedly because I don't think people hear us enough to say, I heard this, I did what I didn't know. I understand something that I didn't know, and now I can actually take part in something that I just heard. And that's the action part. And now we have Dr. Troy on, and off air, before people know, I have to say this off air, is that we were talking about the museum, and I've been to his museum, and I met him with my daughter, and then the African American Museum in DC. Not that it takes nothing away from it, but this is
we're not there yet. We haven't even introduced the museum yet, so we want to give the proper introduction first. We want to introduce Dr. Boddy. We want to introduce. So let me introduce Dr. Boddy first, and then we have a 3-minute video that we want to show, and we have one of the star. Well, we have the star of the 3-minute video there with us as well. So I'm happy to have her join us, and then she might chime in with whatever questions that she has. But let me introduce Dr. Boddy first, and then we're going to the museum and comparisons with other museums and things of that sort, if you don't mind. I don't want to steal your thunder, but this is where.
No, go ahead.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, drum roll.
Drum roll.
We have Dr. Troy E. Boddy as our special guest today. Dr. Boddy lives in Sandy Spring, Maryland. He is a Morehouse Man, receiving a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, a Master's of Science in Elementary Education from the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut, and a doctorate of organizational leadership from Hood College. First of all, I love it that you're a Morehouse Man, because I'm an HBCU person myself, having come from Howard. Oh, we like to call the Mecca. So
yeah, I hear that.
Dr. Boddy is a seasoned educator and administrator in the Montgomery County, Maryland public school system. Dr. Boddy was an assistant principal at Oakland Terrace Elementary School, and he was a principal at Beall Elementary School, and the director of the Montgomery County Public Schools Equity Initiatives Unit. Dr. Boddy contributes immensely to the educational objectives of the Sandy Springs Slave Museum and African Art Gallery. So thank you so much, Dr. Boddy, for joining us. We really appreciate having you here. And as we stated before, now that you have been introduced, we want to share a video with you, well, with all of us, because you've seen the video. So, so that way we can go ahead and, okay, so the video should be here. Of course it's not. Okay. So the video should be here. There it is. Okay.
Hello, my name is Natalie Thomas, historian and genealogist here at the Sandy Springs Slave Museum and African Art Gallery. We are located on Brook Road in historic Sandy Spring, Maryland. The community of Sandy Spring was founded in 1728 by Quakers who grew tobacco and corn on plantations that often relied on slave labor. Nearly a half a century later, an anti-slavery sentiment grew among the Quaker community. And beginning in 1790, enslaved people in this area were given their freedom. Those newly freed people settled on the land that surrounds this museum, becoming the first free Black settlement in Montgomery County. To highlight and honor that heritage, Dr. Winston Anderson founded the Sandy Springs Slave Museum and African Art Gallery in 1988. Here, you can not only learn about the many Black families and communities of Montgomery County, but also place them within the larger context of African and African American history. The museum's Great Hall houses an extensive collection of historical artifacts and documents tracing Black heritage from their origins, enslavement, the Underground Railroad, Jim Crow, the struggle for civil rights, all leading to the accomplishments that Africans and African Americans have made in the building of America. Also on site are an African hut, a log cabin, a cross-section of a clipper ship, as well as our newest exhibits, the Door of No Return and the African American Heritage Trail. The collection includes an extensive assortment of artwork reflecting the cultural and artistic achievements of the African diaspora. The museum serves as both a research and educational facility where people can immerse themselves in this rich history. Through programs, tours, and ongoing dialogue, we hope to reach reconciliation and healing with the past, enabling us to move proudly into the future. For more information on hours of operation, programs, and tours, visit our website at sandyspringsslavemuseum.org.
Okay, well, now that we have had this great introduction to the museum, we hope that Dr. Boddy could tell us even more about the museum and about you personally and individually, Dr. Boddy, because you have lots of lived experience in Sandy Spring as well.
So good evening, everybody, and thanks for coming out and joining us tonight. I want to send a shout out to my fellow Sandy Spring Slave Museum and African Art Gallery board members, Deborah Buchanan and Lydia. Please jump in if I get something wrong or leave something out. And one of our volunteers, Sheila Bell. So thank you all for joining me and supporting us tonight. So the museum is one of the cool things, like funny, it's just funny how life works. I always wanted to work in a museum as a kid. So I'd go downtown to the Smithsonian and I would see the exhibits, I love the Natural History Museum with the dinosaurs, and what kid doesn't?
Mhm.
And, the hall they used to have that kind of transition from, the cave people to modern people. And so I would go home and I would make, kind of replicate what I saw in the museums in my room. That drove my mother crazy because the room would have paint and newspapers and all kinds of things. But I've always I've always been attracted to history. And so that was one of my, just one of those things, as you're a kid, you have that list of things you want to be. That was on my list. The other thing is like my father, who he loved history. So we always had history books. He was a educator, so we always had books in the house, but he particularly loved history books. And he told us stories about his family, his ancestors. So that whole idea of genealogy. And then when I was young, that's when Roots first came out. And Alex Haley, who had a brother who lived in Sandy Spring and attended Sharp Street Church, came out. And so that just widened my understanding or that awakening of Black history. And so we were always raised to be very proud of where we came from, who we came from. And so that's always been a part of, kind of who I was. And so fast forward 56 years, and here I am at Sandy Spring Museum, and being blessed to be the co-director. And I want to send a shout out to Sandy Williams, who is the other co-director of the museum, who, we grew up together. And so we get to work together in this capacity, to really elevate the work of the museum and the history of Sandy Spring. So Dr. Anderson, who is the founder of the museum.
Oh, I actually, sorry to interrupt. Occupational, well, I always tell people two reasons why I do that. First of all, I grew up in New York and that's what we do. And second of all, I'm a lawyer and that's what we do. So
I can do it back now.
I'm very problematic when it comes to that. But before you do that, you talked about your father. Can you tell us who your father was and why he is so prominently known in the Sandy Spring community? And also tell people where Sandy Spring is, because I think some people might not know exactly where Sandy Spring is located.
Well, how could you not know where Sandy Spring is? But no, Sandy Spring is located off of just outside of Omley. So it is made up of actually 3 historically Black kinship communities. So you have Sandy Spring, which is off of 108, near Sherwood High School, that area of Montgomery County. You also have Holly Grove, and you also have what was used to be known as Cincinnati, which is now Ashton, Maryland. So this historic Black community forms like a C shape. And it's called a kinship community because most people in the 3 communities that were a part of those original enslaved people that were freed by the Quakers are all related. So we're all kind of cousins. When we dig back far enough, we can see how we're connected. And so my father, he grew up in a small town called Rising Sun. And when he was in high school,
okay, I've got to stop and ask again. Is it in Louisiana? Is it where the song is named after?
Look, I had lawyer on my list too, so we can play this plan. No, it was in Rising Sun, Maryland, right above.
Okay. I've never heard of that. I don't think I have. Who knows?
It's about 40 minutes north of Baltimore.
Okay.
So he grew up, they have very limited means, and his father, one of the pivotal things that happened to him was his father was killed by a drunk driver on his way home, his father was a construction worker who worked on the Conowingo Dam. And on his way home one evening, a white man who had been drinking hit and killed him. And so he had to
Go up
work.
fast.
Yeah, he had to
Mhm.
work, go to school, which is really incredible at the time because many people would have stopped and just got a job. But
Mhm.
he continued to go to school and work and support his family, and eventually he went to Bowie's Teachers College and got his teaching certificate. Because at the time, Black folks getting degrees in education didn't get degrees, they got certificates. And in the museum, we also have an example of a certificate of a community member to teach at colored schools. So they even had separate certificates for educators. And so one day he was visiting a friend and they went to Sharp Street. They had gone to church, which is in Sandy Spring and part of the community. And he got introduced to Sandy Spring, and it was, he just fell in love with it. He writes in a couple of books where they've done little short bios of him, that he thought it was like a garden spot and he wanted to live here and he wanted to teach here. So a couple years
Well,
later,
I mean, that's really easy to see. You could see from the video how beautiful and lush it is. I love the aerial scenes because I've never seen it from that angle before. And I mean, it's gorgeous when you drive around it. It has these, I guess, winding roads and, and all that kind of stuff. So it's beautiful. But when you see the aerial view and you see how beautiful the buildings are and how lush, the community is, you can see why your father would fall in love with it.
yeah, and it was all owned by Black people. And it
Free
was
Black people
free Black people.
before the Emancipation Proclamation, which is something we have not heard of before, I don't think.
It was the first free Black town in Montgomery County.
Mhm.
And so my ancestors and those of some of the other folks that work at the museum, you know, our ancestors were freed at least, 60 plus years before the Emancipation Proclamation, which kind of allowed them to do some things that other people wouldn't be able to do. Other Blacks in the area and throughout the country weren't able to do until much later. So, he came to this area, became a teacher. He taught at a 3-room schoolhouse that's now a private home. You would never even know it was a school building. And the building, which is named after him now, was one of the three of the last colored schools built in Montgomery County before schools were desegregated. And so he finished out his career in Montgomery County as a principal and community coordinator, and then worked for the rec department, which was kind of his part-time gig for years, full-time for another 20 some years before he passed away.
Wow.
So he was really involved in the community, the civic associations. He played a role along with many others from the Sandy Spring community and in the larger African-American community in Montgomery County to come up with the plan to desegregate schools.
Wow. That's amazing. And the recreation center that's named after him now is right across the street from the Sandy Springs Slave Museum and African American Art Gallery.
Yep. So I get to, live in my legacy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. So please tell us some more about the Sandy Spring Slave Museum and Art Gallery, now that we've learned about the illustrious career of your father.
And so the museum, Dr. Anderson, our founder, it was interesting because it was the first time I heard like his telling of how he arrived in Sandy Spring. And so Dr. Anderson was Jamaican born. he came to the United States. His mother sent him, he and his brothers, to the United States with just a couple dollars in their pocket. And, you know, lo and behold, years later, I know at least two of them are doctors. Dr. Anderson was the department chair at Howard University's Department of Zoology. And so he had a whole storied career, but traveled the world collecting artifacts from all the places he visited, and also just had a strong connection to Black history. And so one day he stumbled upon Sandy Spring, you know, much like my dad did. So it was kind of an interesting connection for me, because Dr. Anderson reminds me of my father, his disposition. They even look alike sometimes, and they have a similar sense of humor. So he came here and he saw a gentleman in the community on this white horse. And he saw the same thing that my dad saw. It's this like beautiful area that kind of reminded him of home. It was rural, and he was like, wow. So he started talking and getting to know the people in the community, and they started telling their stories. And so he learned the story of how this was the first free person's community in Montgomery County, and all the stories and all the people and players that came out of this one little community. And he said, there's, you know, he just realized there's something special here. And so he built this, the museum started off in 1988 with a petting zoo. So Dr.
Yes,
Anderson,
I remember that. They used to have alpacas.
right.
Yes,
There were alpacas, I think some llamas, some chickens, and some other animals. And I just remember I was in college around that time, and so I was like, what is going on over here? I just thought it was the wackiest thing. And then I see a ship being built, and then there was a hut, you know, it looked like an African hut, and then there was a cabin, and it's like, what is going on? And then the animals running around. So the llamas would get out and run through the community, which people didn't necessarily love, but it added to the charm. But over time,
and also I think the kids loved it, because I remember bringing my kids over there during the different progressions, and whatever they had in there. I mean, the kids absolutely loved it. They loved petting the animals and playing around with them and chasing after them sometimes. So.
As my Aunt Isabel would say, that was before my time. I was a little child then. So I would just drive past and see, and Aunt Isabel would say that for everything. It's like, Aunt Isabel, you were a grown woman when this happened. What are you talking about? You're a little child. But over time, you know, and he built everything, you know, he built everything. And so he built the clipper ship, the clipper slave ship. There's a hut that is resembles that which Nelson and Mandela grew up in.
Well, let's go back a little bit, and we'll get to the hut, because I want to talk about that as well. But the Clipper slave ship, sorry, tell us about that, because that is one of the most significant part of that. And I think, to my memory, that's one of the things I remember very clearly the first time that I went to the museum.
And so what Dr. Anderson did was he built a replica of a portion of a slave clipper ship. And inside there are sculptures that depict what it might have looked like, or what it looked like during the Middle Passage for Africans being transported after being kidnapped from Africa. And inside of it, you see people chained together, and he has them separated by gender, which is what really happened during the Middle Passage. He has a tape that he plays with people, Africans speaking different indigenous languages. And what's really cool, when kids come to visit the museum, kids from that are African can pick up on the language, and they think it's the coolest thing that they can understand what the people are saying. Because one of the things they did was they separated us by ethnic groups, so we couldn't communicate with each other. So the whole process was insidious. But today, what we have is we got a huge grant, so we're upgrading some of the technology. So if you were to visit now, you would hear what it may have sounded like during the middle passage. And so when you come, you'll get a little bit of background, and then you'll hear the sounds of the sheer horror that people endured during that middle passage. Again, because we want people to not only see things, but we want them and touch things, which makes us unique. But we also want you to feel things when you're at the museum, because we believe that it leaves a lasting impact on people's understanding, which is typically superficial, about that whole period of slavery and the sheer brutality of it. There's so many people that want to sugarcoat it and whitewash it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I find most interesting about the museum, the emotions that it evokes. I like I said, the first time that I saw the clipper ship and what was inside, I was, yeah, I went home and I still could not get it out of my mind for weeks on end. To this day, I still cannot get it out of my mind because it was just so real. And I think that was the first time it became so real to me. I have seen depictions on, in movies and television, but they weren't as real as what I saw in there. Dr. Dyer?
Yeah, so Dr. Troy, one of the questions is, there has to be pushback in the community of having this there. What is that pushback?
It's at least since I have been part of the museum, first as a board member, first as a volunteer, then a board member, and then as co-director, the community actually embraces it, because what's unique about, and again, what makes us really special is we tell the story of the communities. So, so it's so nice to be in a space where we have a room called the family room. And I see family on the walls. I see people who I looked up to as a child. So the community actually, as far as I've never had any pushback or heard pushback from the community, because the museum is them and it's telling our story for the world here.
And yet they are refusing to want to teach this in the schools. So how does that balance work, where they don't mind the museum being there, but just don't teach my kids?
Well, I think that's one of the best things, because Dr. Anderson, well, we said his last name, we'll say his whole name, Dr. Winston Anderson. He didn't wait for permission. I think he just got this house and decided to start doing his own thing and invited people to come in and see what he was doing, which was incredible. So you could either come and see what was there, or you could stay and not, so he didn't ask for permission. He's like, this is what I want to do. And,
Right. And I think we have to be more like that. And so to get to your question, Dr. Paul, it's that idea of, what's funny to me, I was saying, talking earlier, I was reading something, and I kind of forgot about it. It's like, after Reconstruction, Black folks built historically Black colleges. We ran for office. We did all the things. And one of the things that we did in the South was we pushed for public education. So it's funny kind of to me that Black people were the folks who moved public education in this country. And yet you have people outside screaming, talking about, we don't want to teach Black history. When the very institutions that you are trying to push against are and the people you're trying to push again are the people who established and gave you this opportunity. But I will say, in Montgomery County, and we don't have it perfect, but
hold on, I'll underline that.
Not
even damn near close. So I'll put that out there. So keep going.
But they are making some strides, particularly in the area of social studies. one of the things that they are working on is making improvements to the curriculum, which I was a part of before I left or retired. And this month, as part of a county effort, is reconciliation and remembrance. And so they've introduced lessons from grades 2 to 12 to talk about historically Black communities and emancipation in Maryland. And in fact, we have one whole middle school that's coming through the museum. They're bringing all their kids through. And I will name the name, Farquhar Middle School. So it's part of helping kids to know and understand the historical nature of our community. So the kids have been going through learning about the community and the Black history that lives here in the Sandy Spring Only area. We had school staff and Dr. Lakeisha Lashley, who's on the call, who brought her whole staff over to help prepare them to teach these particular lessons. So we talked about what emancipation in Maryland looked like, the conditions of enslaved people, and the kind of language that, because that's always one of my fears, like how we teach it and what we say, the language we use. So we spent some time on developing that. And then again, walking them through and giving them a deep knowledge of what it was like, particularly in this area for enslaved people, so that they left a little bit differently than when they came in. But there are other places, like I have my own little consulting company, and I saw this RFP for school system in Texas. I was like, we don't even need to touch it, because we don't need to waste our time with them, because we will not get any work there. And if we get through, they'll run us out, because we're going to tell the truth.
I'm not going to get you into political vocalizing, but Montgomery County is willing to do this for the Sandy Springs Museum, and yet they're desecrating the Bethesda African Cemetery on the other hand. It seems so conflicting to us, where if we don't know the complete story of Montgomery County and Maryland, it seems like things are okay when they do this, and then you hear about what they're desecrating and builders doing it over there. It's not okay.
No.
Well, I don't think Montgomery County is doing it. It's Dr. Anderson who's doing it. He's the one who came up with the idea of sharing, his travels and the things that he collected and to do the museum. It's not Montgomery County. I think Montgomery County decided to put it on the Heritage Trail because it was so successful that they couldn't ignore it. So it's not that, Montgomery County decided that they were going to do this. It was this intelligent, good-looking, wonderful man who I just saw on Saturday, and I'm glad that he's still with us, and he's very healthy, and and good humor, like you said, Dr. Boddy.
Wilma Holmes, Principal Holmes. How you doing, dear? Welcome.
I'm good. I just want to tail in on what Troy has said, because one of the things that I just to help you guys, in a sense, put it in perspective, when I first went to Montgomery County, and that was probably 1962 when I was hired, I don't think any teacher that I encountered, or anybody, the whites that I encountered, even had a clue that there were Black pockets of people, African American people in Montgomery County. They just didn't exist. I mean, they didn't have any clue. And if you think about it, there's some Black folks who don't know that there's a spot in Good Hope. There's they're all over Montgomery County. People just don't know that. And I just have to support what Troy is saying, that the school would do what they're asked to do, but nobody's really asked them and given them the kind of support and information that Troy has or the museum has. They don't have it. They don't, and they are looking for that information. And in all due respect to the superintendent, I honestly think she would grab on it and do something with it. We just need to make avail her of it in a sense, beyond the curriculum department. They don't know. They just don't know. And
Will,
Troy, I have to just say this to you.
Uh-huh.
When I first went to Montgomery County, I'm gonna tell a story on myself. I was teaching in an all-white school that had just opened up. It was a brand new building, and the community was all Jewish. I had never in my life been in a Jewish community, never. The closest I had been to it was the corner store in DC. But a little boy kept wearing his yarmulke in the classroom. I didn't know what a yarmulke was. I have to honestly admit that to you. And I kept telling him to take his hat off, that you couldn't wear a hat in my classroom. Well, his mother was livid with me. But if it hadn't been for your Ross body and the lady with the NAACP, I would have been going to hell. But he told me to go see her, Miss Throckmorton.
wow.
And she went to a meeting with me. Now that's been a long time ago. I know it was 1962.
Wow.
So I love him, but just to put in the perspective for you guys, that's where we were a long time ago, and I've been there a long time. Sorry, but I had to tell you that.
Oh, thank you, Wilma, because it is education. So
Right.
there's a bunch of things going on. And so one of the roles that we play is to build people's knowledge about this time. Because one time, just another story, just kind of connected to not knowing. I noticed when I was director of equity that there were people, and we do lots of trainings and those kind of things, and there were lots of people that did not even realize Montgomery County was the southern, it was the South, and that we had slavery in this area, and that it wasn't like it is now, however you want to define that. So it amazes me that people don't know these things. But one of the goals of the museum is to build that historical context so that we know. When Fairland came the other week, we, Sandy, our co-director, did some research on the community, and we found that the Fairland community, the land was owned by a Black woman. And they didn't know that. And so there's so many, and you think about our communities change, people are moving in, they don't know this history. So we have to have spaces and places that elevate the rich Black history. And we have so much in this area, and make it accessible to people so that we know. It's kind of, our pushback to CRT.
Yeah, that is so true. Montgomery County is so rich in history. Like the Fairland community has a Smithville school, right? From the Sears and, well, one of the co-founders of Sears and Roebuck, and we could delve into that. But I took you off course a little while ago because you were telling us about the hut that is on the property of the Sandy Springs Slave Museum and Art Gallery.
I think Will want to say something.
Okay. This may be something that everybody knows, but according to one of the two Montgomery County newspapers, the Sentinel or the Journal, and this was in the 1960s or 70s, the newspaper said that in 1900, Montgomery County was more than half Black.
Interesting.
Does everybody know that?
No.
I didn't know that.
Huh?
No,
Wow.
never.
I didn't know that.
What newspaper was that, and when was that,
It was either
Will?
the Sentinel or the Journal, and it was like 1970, maybe before.
Interesting.
But if you put it in context, this is why they had Black codes and all those things, because there were more Black people than white people. And so again, they had to put those kind of laws in place, not only, just here, but across the nation, because oftentimes Blacks were at least a decent part of any given population of an area.
Well, we could be in Montgomery County right now if we really looked at it. If I haven't looked recently, but we were pushing it really hard. So we could very well be.
Well, the
So
school-
doesn't that lead us back to the idea of has been brought up, and I know I'm on the reparations committee in Montgomery County. Do you get involved in that research too, Dr. Troy, with the Slave Museum about reparations in the county?
We haven't had, I think there might be a board member that gets contacted every now and then, but we haven't done deep work in terms of in that particular area. Other than we're working with the Sandy Spring Museum on doing a community conversations on reparations. And one of the things as we kind of planned, I was like, well, we can't start the conversation with reparations for Black people until we have the conversation about how people, you know, former enslavers gained reparations for the loss of their property. So if we're gonna have the conversation, we have to have it in its fullest terms before we start talking about, because again, people don't know the historical context of things. We always start, you know, at the end or at the surface level, but
Yeah.
we gotta, in order to have the conversation, you gotta have all the information. So we don't, we haven't at this point, but I'm sure we'd be glad to participate and help.
Great, because I'll contact you then. So so that's an easy one. But as Marylin said, that I think your museum outside of the Equal Justice Center in Alabama is probably the most powerful museum in the area that I've ever been to. And it's a pleasure to have gone there, because I don't think, and I'm glad for the one in DC. I'm glad, but it seems like it wasn't built for us, it was built for them. That's how
That's the way that I feel too, because the Sandy Springs Slave Museum and Art Gallery and the Holocaust Museum, I find those two museums to be two of the most powerful museums I've ever been to in terms of the emotions that they evoke. And I don't get those emotions from other museums. And I know Teresa is here, and Teresa is very, very familiar with the, there you are. Yeah, very familiar with the National African American History Museum.
No, it's the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
Thank you very much. And I know you and I have had that discussion, and we have talked about why that is, why you don't feel the emotions. And I don't know who has been to both museums, but one of the issues that I have with the National African American History Museum is when you go to the bottom part and they're talking about slavery and people being enslaved, it's almost like they whitewash it, for lack of a better word. For instance,
that's exactly what it is. You said it.
They have what, earrings made out of shackles and jewelry and things of that sort. And then when they talk about the sugar industry, it's a beautiful display with an 8x11 piece of paper that tells you the horrors of that industry and how people's skin would literally fall off their bones from working from sun up to sundown. And so with the Sandy Springs Slave Museum, they show you everything and life size, meaning that when they are shackles, they show you life-size shackles. They don't turn it into jewelry. They don't just show you the jewelry that was made from it. And I thought that was kind of interesting too, to have jewelry made from, made in the way of shackles and things of that sort.
Yeah. Just a quick question. I hope we have time to ask a few political questions. I'm sorry if I'm going to be a little bit like Dr. Paul on that on that issue. But just quickly, how would you compare the Sandy Spring Museum with the Josiah Henson Museum in Rockville? The thing that Josiah Henson is quite small, as some of you may know, off on Old Georgetown Road. And it is on a former, on a part of a former plantation.
Plantation. And for those of you who don't know, Josiah Henson is the person who Uncle Tom's Cabin was,
Right.
how should I say it, was made after. Although when you read his autobiography and you read Uncle Tom's Cabin, the characteristics aren't the same at all, because
Yeah, they're
that
different.
meek man who's in, Uncle Tom's Cabin was not Josiah Henson at
No.
all.
But I wanted to make a point about the feelings that are evoked and the whitewashing of crimes against humanity. When I was at the Josiah Henson Museum, because it was on the plantation, I mean, I don't even think plantation evokes what these places were. These were death camps.
Right.
And I find that when you have the opportunity well, first impression I had when I went to Josiah Henson Museum was that I felt insulted that there were people there who were literally laughing. They happened to be white. Now, maybe this is a way sometimes of people coping, but I almost felt like this was sacrosanct land. We were in a death camp, and none of these people, if they were going to a death camp in Europe, would be laughing. And I felt a rage when I was there, even though I think they try to whitewash as well. So I don't know to what extent this is contributing to what we're saying about the whitewashing, but sometimes the feelings that you have depends on where you come from. So even when they try to do the whitewashing, because we know the history, some of us do, it's still, I still come to the Josiah Henson Museum shaken up and fully conscious that I just was on sacred land where people gave their lives to build this country. How all of this is so uncomfortable, which surprises me that Montgomery County was so accepting of this museum. And the information that we're getting is that certain schools have been so accepting of incorporating the real history of Africans here into the curriculum. I mean, I'm glad to hear from you, Dr. Troy, that you're sharing with us positive experiences with regard to the development of the curriculum. But it surprises me, but I'm glad to hear it, and I wonder whether people are fully understanding what we need to face in order to fully incorporate this history into our curriculum.
And that is the challenge. It's like we can. So, in my experience with the work, and one of the things is like there is a lot of foolishness that goes on, a lot of resistance, either, more often than not, it's very subtle, but we have, but at the same time, we got to persist and continue going. So I try to look at the moving forward, where we're going, because I could get so angry that it's like, I just throw up my hands too. But, one of the things, either doing equity work, as the director of equity work, and even now just engaging in conversations or just seeing how people display history, it can be very technical. And when we talk about whiteness, it's that very technical piece, and not that emotional piece.
Right.
So let's strip it of the feelings and emotions and just tell the story, at the, very least. And so those are the things that we have to continue to work on getting in the spaces, because I haven't been to the museum yet, but it's on my list to get to. So I can't comment about the feelings, but just in general, sometimes, like with even the museum downstairs, it tells the technical aspects of the story. But what we try to do is tell the stories through our lived experiences, through the experiences of our ancestors, the community members that are there. And I think that's what kind of helps make us a little unique, is that personalization that we are able to bring to the stories. And as we grow and build, we want to continue to immerse people in those stories, because that is what helps people to start to see the just like, again, just how horrid a practice enslaving human beings was. And I know you all referenced the Holocaust Museum, and one of the things that we recently did, again, to bring that connection, that humanization of these folks, these enslaved folks, these Black folks that were freed early on in our community, is to, much like when you go to the Holocaust Museum, you get a short story of someone who experienced the Holocaust. We began doing that at the Sandy Springs Slave Museum by using narratives from enslaved people themselves to describe what it was like during that period of time, and how people experienced enslavement differently, because there was no rule book. And so, again, just another way to humanize and help people see, because for so long, we talk the word slave, for example, you just call someone a slave, that narrowly defines them. It doesn't tell their full richness, their full stories, their hopes, their dreams, their experiences. And so, but when we talk about enslaved people, we then humanize people who weren't traditionally humanized or seen as humans. And so, again, that's just part of the work that we try to do in not only communicating history, but building it with that emotional aspect of storytelling.
Before you leave, I just want to let people thank everyone listening to Bridges. You Be the Judge every Wednesday from 6 to 7. And I know there's always takes funding to do the work you've been doing. And again, thank you. I mean, again, it's emotional thank you for many of us, but there is some superficial thank you that people can send money. And where can they send money?
So if you visit our webpage, we are always looking for donations. You can get a membership. You can come out and bring a group to tour the space. This Saturday coming up, we're celebrating Emancipation Day. And so from 10 to 12, we have the museum open for a free open house. At 2 o'clock from 2 to about 3:30, we're going to have a living museum. One of the things that we did, because it's so important that we bring youth into the museum, we've created a youth board. And so the youth will be presenting at the Living Museum, highlighting various people who we're calling it Stories of the Underground Railroad. So various local people who sought freedom or helped others gain their freedom over time. And so that's $20. So come out and support our youth. But please, visit our webpage. We are always looking for fundings. We write a lot of grants. We just got one to bring a lot of technology into the museum. So we're real excited about that, because it'll take us to the next level. But come out and support us. We also rent the building out for events. So if those folks who have sororities, fraternities, different clubs, come on out. We will close the place down and let you utilize it for your events and or private tours. So those are some of the.
I just have a question.
Mm-hmm. Hold on, Will. Hold on, Teresa. Go ahead, Will.
Okay, I have a question about Sandy Spring. 5 or 10 years ago, there was some litigation that the houses that some Black folks lived in were not connected to the public highway. There was no way to get. Whatever happened?
it's still in the court system. They're saying that, you know, the folks didn't have addresses. You don't have an address, you kind of don't exist. And so there's a and I'm not as versed in this, but it hasn't been settled.
Okay.
It still has not been settled.
And Teresa, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to understand that you said you haven't been to the National Museum of African American History and Culture yet. Is that what you said?
No,
You
I haven't
haven't.
been to the Henson Museum.
Oh, the Henson Museum.
Yeah, I've been to the one downtown 3 or 4 times.
Okay, as you know, every gallery has been sponsored by some corporation. Let's say that the History Gallery is the David M. Rubenstein History Gallery. Will you ever have anything like that happen in your museum? I'm just asking because I had a fit to have to go through this man's name to get to our history. And I just wanted to know what you thought about that.
Dr. Anderson's vision is that we will stay a private museum, because as a private museum, we get to tell the story the way that we want to tell it, how we want to tell it. And so that's very important to us. And so as long as we can get the funding to, you know, keep the lights on and keep it going, we're 100% volunteers. So none of us get paid. It's a labor of love. And hopefully we you know, we're always seeking out grant funding. So eventually we would like to be able to pay people for their time and services. But our goal is to remain a private entity so that we can tell the story of our people, of our community in the way that we want to do it. And so that's kind of where we are right now. So we may not have as much money as some of the other smaller museums, but we own and have the creative rights to tell the story the way we want.
And you have so much, because one of the things that you have is the Nelson Mandela hut, because I want to talk about that, and I want to talk about the Heritage Trail before we're finished. If you could talk about those two things, please.
So one of the outside buildings is a hut that's a replica of that in which Nelson Mandela grew up in. And it houses a large part of Dr. Anderson's collections of sculptures and artifacts that he's collected throughout the African diaspora. So it's a real, just if you are into African art as such, it's a great little place to visit to really get an up close look of these things. And again, oftentimes you can, many of the artifacts you can touch. And what was your other part of the question, Marylin?
The Heritage.
Oh, the Heritage Trail. So one of the newest exhibits at the museum is the Heritage Trail. And it's kind of an extension of the family room. So it tells about the places and people of Sandy Spring, the various families. So it takes it a little more in depth. Hopefully one day we'll take all of those portraits out that are outside and put them in a book, so that people could have it in their homes. But it's just another opportunity to go deeper and learn more about the actual people who lived in the community, like a Carolyn Snowden, the Ockards, who were a prominent family, so it keeps the legacies of our families alive.
Well, very good. Miss Buchanan looks like she wants to add something. Miss Buchanan, do you want to, because you've been adding some very interesting things in the chat. That's okay if you don't, but I just thought I'd give you a chance to.
Thank you for the opportunity. This is Debbie Buchanan. I am the volunteer manager at the museum. And I was sharing that the white round structure that Dr. Boddy was just talking about, the we call it the pavilion, that is indicative of the type of housing you find from the Ndebele tribe in South Africa. Dr. Anderson actually went to South Africa, spoke with Nelson Mandela, got some ideas from him, and brought those back to build the hut, the pavilion that we now have on the property. I don't know if Dr. Troy mentioned or not, but Dr. Anderson is not only a retired zoology professor, he's also a great artist, and he has many of the things on the property were built by he and his brother, from the cross section of the slaving clipper ship, the art pavilion, and we have inside the Great House is the relief panels that he actually carved, and they tell a story. So when you have to come and see and read the relief panels, it's very informative. He is just a jack of all trades.
What's, before we take off, one of the things that Bernadette said, that I'm an outdoors guy and I do a lot of hiking and tromping through the woods. And there is an emotion in Maryland that I get out of the states. When I hike in the southern states, I feel the same way too, because I don't just walk on the beaten path. I'm always through the muck and the muck and the muck. And when I'm out there, I get this overwhelming feeling like people were running for their lives through these woods. And normally out there with just me and my dog, and it brings me to my knees, and I actually grab the earth and the trees, because they've been there and they witnessed the beating and the killing and maybe the escaping of a person, and I thank them for leading them through this path. It's just something I go through, and when I'm in the woods in the mountains of Maryland, that many other people, like Bernadette says, that they're just out there having fun with their dogs or whatever, but it's an overwhelming feeling to feel like people escape through these woods and in this area running for their lives, and some didn't make it, some did, but it's a feeling that it does happen to me every time I'm in the woods.
I also think of the Native Americans.
Yeah.
I'm overwhelmed thinking of the Native Americans and of the Africans who were here.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and it's very interesting that you should say that, since Sandy Spring was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And in the museum, you could see where people used to, depictions of how people used to hide in certain parts of houses and things of that sort. It's a really, really interesting museum. I wish everybody gets a chance to go, and I really hope you do, so that way we could come back and talk about what our experience was.
So I'm inviting everybody out. So come on out and see us.
Mhm.
We'll be glad.
Everybody's welcome. Mhm.
Thanks everyone for listening to Bridges. You be the judge every Wednesday from 6 to 7. We'll stay on and talk to Troy, but we'll cut off the live broadcast and the podcast from here on. And if you want to know more, you just got to come out to the Sandy Springs Museum and get more information, please. Thank you.
Thank you.